Let's go live to Professor of International Law at the Australian National University, Don Rothwell. Professor Rothwell, thanks for your time. Let me just start with your overall reaction to that dramatic news out of the ICC when they're seeking arrest warrants of not just three leaders of the terrorist group Hamas, but the Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli Defence Minister as well.
Thanks, Kieran. Look, I think this to a degree was anticipated. We know that the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Cameron Khan, had been actively investigating the situation both in Israel arising from the October 7 Hamas attacks, but also the Israeli response in Gaza. So they'd been flagging a very active investigation. They'd been pouring resources into investigating the situation there. And indeed, there's been speculation over the course of the last few weeks about such arrest warrants pending and how the international community might react to it. So to a degree, this overnight is just really a confirmation of those ongoing processes.
What do you say to the suggestion that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over Israel? Israel is not a member state of the ICC.
Look, I think that's a legitimate legal question to raise, but this has been addressed already by the International Criminal Court in terms of determining that there is a legitimacy in terms of the way in which the court can investigate the situation in Gaza. And if you think about it, Karen, it's not a dissimilar situation with respect to the jurisdiction that the International Criminal Court has exercised over Vladimir Putin, because Russia is also not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. But the view taken by the ICC was that President Putin is alleged to be responsible for certain acts conducted in Ukraine. Likewise, the position of the ICC is that certain senior Israeli political leaders are responsible for certain acts conducted in Gaza, which are contrary to the Rome Statute.
It seems clear that, it is clear that the behaviour of the Hamas group, the terrorists on October 7, breached any sense of international law. There's no doubt about that. But again, I ask you, in terms of Hamas, Professor Rothwell, does the International Criminal Court have jurisdiction over, say, a terrorist group like Hamas that isn't a state?
Interestingly enough, Kieran, that's actually a more clear-cut issue because, of course, the arrest warrants, if they're issued, will be issued against individuals rather than Hamas. And so the three individuals who've been named already by the ICC prosecutor are all citizens of Palestine. Palestine is a state which accepts the ICC's jurisdiction. So to that end, there's a very clear case that the International Criminal Court would have jurisdiction over Palestinians who are members of Hamas who are alleged by the court and by the prosecutor to have committed these atrocious acts.
Indeed. What you've seen, though, I'm just really interested to see whether you think there's been any comparable indictment that's been issued by the ICC. In your experience, the reaction has been enormous from the White House through to Berlin and the German leadership saying there's no moral equivalence between the two. Really reaction around the world to what we've seen here. Do you remember any scenario like we're seeing right now, the way this has really exploded in a legal sense and international in terms of the diplomatic response too?
Look, I think that those are all fair comments, and indeed I cannot recall an incident where any international court, let alone the International Criminal Court, has sought to issue arrest warrants for both parties to a conflict, both in this case Hamas and the senior Israeli leadership. And so to that end, it's very clear that the ICC prosecutor, Cameron Khan, has gone out of his way to ensure that the court is being seen as being very even-handed, that they've thoroughly investigated the situation, and that they will be seeking to move forward if the arrest warrants are issued to ultimately prosecute both the three Hamas leaders, but also the two Israeli political leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And finally, Professor Rothwell, what are the logistics around mechanics to get the individuals that have been mentioned before the court if they refuse to cooperate? And if the governments in question refuse to cooperate, what can they do?
Well, look, Karen, that's going to be very difficult because in the case of Israel, as we've said, Israel's not a party to the Rome Statute, so it doesn't recognise the legitimacy of the Rome Statute. So there's really a clear parallel between the position with Israel and the position with President Putin and Russia. In the case of the Hamas leaders, while Palestine is a party to the Rome Statute, the Palestinian Authority literally has no capacity to control Hamas and certainly to control events in Gaza. So in the short to medium term, it would look very difficult in terms of how these arrest warrants could actually be effected, and any of these individuals could at least be brought to The Hague to face trial.
Professor Don Rothwell from the ANU, thanks for your insights. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Karen.